All right, y'all, we're back on the man, Mr. Nightmare. This one is three scary true summer camp horror stories. We ain't gonna waste no time. We about to get right into it. Let's go. Story one.
I used to spend my summers as a camp counselor when I was in my early 20s. I got in a lot of trouble when I was younger, and a big reason was that I didn't have any positive role models growing up. So being able to spend my summers out in nature and be a role model to kids was such a rewarding experience and helped me to eventually turn my own life around. However, not every experience was a pleasant one. This specific story happened back in the summer of 2019. At that time, I had already worked at the camp as a counselor for 5 years. Each counselor was given a group of kids, and you were basically responsible for that group, almost like a teacher with a classroom. The summer camp I was at was not like a lot of summer camps that you'd see in movies or TV. It wasn't your typical summer camp bunking situation. Instead of it just being this big barracks-like room, it was set up a lot like a house. You walk in the front door, and you enter this big common area with a TV, a wraparound couch, and a small kitchenette. The common room had a hallway that led to 3 bedrooms. Each room had 4 beds, so I was responsible for 12 campers. My room was on the other side of the common room. The living situation was designed like this to basically give the teens a taste of what it may be like to live in dorms when they go away to college in a few years. One morning, one of the campers came to me and told me that he kept hearing someone walking around all night, and it was keeping him awake. I told him that it was probably one of the other campers using the bathroom, but he didn't think so. He said that he's heard the footsteps for 2 nights now, and when he does, he can hear them all night. I told him I would look into it, and it was nothing to worry about. I honestly assumed it was most likely one of the other campers messing around with the kid. That night, when everyone was in the common room before lights out, I made an announcement to all my campers. I reminded them that once it's lights out, that means everyone is required to stay in bed unless they have to use the bathroom. Most of the campers looked at me with that oblivious look in their eyes, but all shook their heads in agreement. Right before 1 in the morning, I heard several of my campers screaming. I jumped out of bed and ran to their room. When I turned on the light, the 4 teenagers in that room looked like they had seen a ghost. One of them was even in tears. When I asked what happened, one of the kids just pointed to the doorway. The one who came to me earlier about the footsteps finally spoke up. He said he saw a figure standing by the closet door. He thought he was going crazy, so he tried to ignore the figure and go back to sleep, but he couldn't. He said he could hear the sound of heavy breathing. It was too dark in there to see for sure if it was actually a person. It just looked like a shadow obstructing the closet doorway. Instead of freaking out, he woke up his roommates. They also saw the figure, but they didn't know what it was. Apparently, the camper who was in tears was convinced it was one of the other campers from the other room playing a joke on them. He decided to get out of bed and approach the shadowy figure.
Nope.
And when he did, the figure ran out of the room and slammed the door behind it. That's what caused them all to scream. When I asked one camper who tried to approach him if he got a good look at the figure, he said no. But whatever or whoever it was tall. Really tall. That's when he knew it wasn't one of the other campers. I still wasn't convinced a random shadowy figure was just standing in their room. I told them to stay in their beds and I'd look around and make sure nobody was there. Due to all the commotion, the other 2 rooms were awake and were asking what was going on, and I told them to just stay in their rooms. I was convinced that it had to be another camper, maybe even one from another dorm. I believed that they thought they saw something, especially because I could see the fear in that one kid's eyes. I just didn't think it was anything to get worked up about. I searched the house, and I didn't see anybody, or even any evidence that anybody had broken in. The door was still locked, and there wasn't even any mud or grass tracked in from outside. It took a little while, but eventually I got the campers to relax and calm down. I decided to sit in the common room for a while and read. I was wide awake now, and I also wanted to see if this prankster was going to resurface tonight. I started to doze off after a while. I wasn't even fully asleep yet when I heard the wood floor creaking from down the hall. I sat completely still for a second because I wanted to make sure I was hearing what I thought I was hearing. It was footsteps, there was no doubt about it. I got up and slowly made my way to the hallway. I didn't want to turn on the light and scare them away. Remember, I thought this was another camper, so I wanted them to think they were getting away with their little prank. I expected to see one of them standing there like a deer caught in headlights, but that's not what I got. When I looked down that hallway, standing in front of an open window was a tall figure. I couldn't make out any details from this figure, but it was there. It was a dark silhouette, clearly a person. Its hand was on the doorknob of the same room that it had been earlier. I didn't scream because I didn't want to wake up the campers or scare them any more than they already were. The figure let go of the door and turned to face me. I had never been so scared in my life. I couldn't even see this thing's eyes, but just knowing that it was looking back at me made me feel like my legs were made of jello. Now that it was facing me, I could see that the figure was even taller than I thought. Its head was almost hitting the top of the door frame. This was clearly not a teenager. Just the way it moved, you could tell it wasn't a kid. I expected the figure to charge at me, but it didn't. It felt like an uncomfortably long time that the figure just stood at the end of the hallway. I could even hear them breathing heavily. Then, with a strangely erratic movement, it stepped out of the open window and it disappeared into the darkness. Then I called the man in charge of the camp and told him he had to call the police, which he did as soon as we got off the phone. Some of the other counselors who weren't responsible for staying with the kids searched the surrounding woods, but didn't find any sign of another person. When the police came, I told them everything I could, but because the information I had was so vague, they couldn't do anything. It's not like the cops can go off a description that says they looked like a tall shadow. I felt like we should have canceled the rest of camp, but the kids and their parents decided it was safe, and we continued with the rest of summer camp. The family that operated the summer camp hired some off-duty cops to sit around the camp and basically be security. We checked every door and window throughout the entire property to make sure everything was locked. It was shocking to me that just about every window at the camp was unlocked. The first thing I did when I got home was make sure my windows at home were locked. I know that this story could have been much worse for the kids or me, and honestly, we're lucky that physically we left this unharmed. Seeing that figure messed me up. I can't imagine how those poor kids felt or even still feel. 2019 was not that long ago. The worst part of all this is the not knowing. We never got any answers. I have no clue where the shadowy figure came from. I have no clue what they wanted. And potentially most disturbing, I have no idea why they were only messing around with that one specific room. It's the not knowing that will keep me up for the rest of my life.
Story 2.
When I was in high school, my parents made me attend some stupid religious summer camp. I hated the outdoors, and I wasn't a summer camp person. I liked to spend most of my time playing video games or hanging out with my friends in the neighborhood. I guess that's why my parents made me go. It was an effort to get me outside and hopefully make some new friends. Instead, I left summer camp with an experience I'll never forget. Something that I still can't explain. I spent the first few days getting acquainted with my bunkmates and just getting a lay of the land. It honestly was fun. I was starting to enjoy myself. As a 15-year-old boy, I also loved the fact that this camp was co-ed. I remember going out of my way to try to impress the girls. One girl especially, Jenny Messina, I started crushing on hard. I started basing my camp activities for the day based on whatever Jenny was doing. She was the superstitious type. Her favorite part of camp was sitting around the fire at night and listening to ghost stories, something I didn't think would be allowed at a religious summer camp. One night, while we were sitting around the campfire, one of our camp counselors told us a ghost story. There's a small cabin just a short walk from all the other cabins that's abandoned. According to the story, some horrific accident happened there decades ago, and ever since, the cabin's been abandoned. He didn't go into details about what happened there, but implied that it was gruesome, and he used the word evil. He then went on to tell us the classic ghost story tropes that one tells when they tell a story about some haunted building. People have claimed to see figures walking around through the windows at night, or hear strange noises, and according to the counselor, one camper was never seen again. Right after that, the counselor screamed in an attempt to scare the campers, and it worked for about 50% of the people listening to his story. Everyone left except Jenny. She asked if there really was a camper that was never seen again. The counselor told us it was just an urban legend. Just a story they tell the older kids at camp to scare them. He doesn't believe it's haunted. We all sat around for a while after the story talking about it. We all assumed they left the cabin there empty on purpose to give the story some weight, make it seem like it's actually a true story in some way. Having the empty cabin there for seemingly no reason gives the story a strange sense of validation. At least that's what some people, like Jenny, thought. The counselor eventually gathers us all up and tells us it's time to head to our rooms for the night. What he didn't know was that a small group of us had a plan to sneak out that night to play Truth or Dare. Jenny was one of the people sneaking out as well. We waited a few hours to make sure all the counselors had gone in for the night, and we snuck out. We met down by the water, which was about a 10-minute walk from the cabins. We wanted to make sure we were a safe distance from the cabins so nobody would hear us. There were 8 of us who snuck down there. The 5 boys got down there first, and the 3 girls showed up a few minutes after us. We sat around for a little while, and then started playing Truth or Dare. I was using this as an excuse to try and impress Jenny in some way. At first, everyone was scared to say Dare and was sticking to Truth. When it finally was my turn, I said Dare. They dared me to go inside the abandoned cabin, of course, and stay there for 10 minutes. I could see Jenny look terrified, but I didn't care about this haunted cabin. I didn't believe the ghost story. We all quietly snuck up to the cabin. There was this weird uneasiness in the air. I think it was because everyone was thinking about the story from earlier, so it felt like there was the shred of truth. I only felt slightly uneasy because I was about to break into a cabin when I was supposed to be in bed. Breaking 2 rules was a lot scarier to me than a ghost story. I walked up to the door and looked behind me. Everyone I was with was standing behind some trees watching me. I was surprised that the door was open. I didn't have to force it or try breaking into a window. I just walked right in like I owned the place. I closed the door behind me and walked around the empty cabin. It was dark. There was a little light coming inside the windows from the moon, but it was still mostly dark. It smelled old and musty in there, like nobody had been in there for years. It also felt colder than it should have. I continued walking around, trying to beat out the clock, and then I heard the sound of wood creaking behind me. It sounded like somebody walking. I turned around, and nobody was there. I thought to myself that maybe the wood had a delayed creak from my walking. I know that doesn't make sense, but that's what my teenage brain thought. I looked at my watch, and I couldn't believe only 2 minutes had passed. I felt like I had been in there for 20 minutes. There was a structural beam in the middle of the cabin that I decided to lean on while I waited. When I was standing there, I started hearing that creaking sound again. I looked all around the cabin, but it was still just me in there. Then, I heard the sound get louder and faster, almost like someone was running on the creaky wooden floor, but nothing was there, and then just stopped. I looked at my watch, and only another minute has passed. I walked over to the window and looked outside to try and see my friends, but I couldn't see them. I cupped my hands on the window and looked exactly where they said they were, and they didn't appear to be there. I started knocking on the window, trying to see if I could get their attention, but nobody appeared from the other side of the tree. I didn't want to admit this to myself, but I was scared. The story and how all my friends reacted to it must have gotten to me on some level, because I felt off. I decided I was going to leave. I was sure that my friends would love to rip into me anyway. I walked over to the door to leave, and when I tried opening it, it wouldn't open. I tried to force the door open, and it still wouldn't budge. I looked down at the doorknob. I thought maybe I accidentally locked it when I walked inside, but there was no lock on the door. I thought it had to be sticking then. I started to slam into the door, and nothing happened. While I was doing this, the sounds coming from inside the cabin were getting louder. The footsteps were loud and happening all around me. It felt unnatural. I swear I felt something sinister at that moment. It felt like someone was standing right behind me. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, but I couldn't even turn around. I started banging on the door, yelling for help. I heard someone on the other side of the door trying to get it open, but they couldn't get it open either. It was Jenny. I thought everyone was gone because I didn't see them, but thankfully Jenny was there. I heard her say that the door was locked and that they were trying to get it open. I still didn't turn around. I know this sounds insane, but I felt breath on my shoulder while I was facing the door. I couldn't hear anyone breathing, and I never saw anyone with my own eyes, but I could tell somehow that someone was behind me.
Run.
I let go of the doorknob and fell to the ground, leaning my head against the door. I was basically expecting defeat. Then the door opened and I fell out. Standing there were 2 camp counselors. I never felt so much relief in my life. I ran out and fell to the ground in front of the cabin. I started thanking them for getting me out, and they didn't look pleased. They basically brought me to the main cabin, and I had to sleep in what is essentially solitary confinement, summer camp edition. The next morning, I had a meeting with the woman who runs the camp. I told her about my experience, and she just kept rolling her eyes basically. She told me that counselors aren't supposed to tell that story because it gives the campers nightmares. She assured me that the story isn't true, and it's a stupid story designed to scare us. She didn't care much about what I had to say. She ended up calling my parents, and I got kicked out of summer camp for breaking curfew, sneaking out, and breaking into a restricted camp building.
Wow.
Honestly, I was so scared from the previous night, I didn't care I was getting kicked out. I was happy to be going home and spending the rest of my summer vacation grounded. Back then, I remember looking into the story more. The internet was not as expansive as it is right now. I couldn't find any details on whether the story was true or not. The camp has since closed, and every time over the years I try to look the story up, I never can find anything. It's easy to say that this was all my mind, but that's not the case. I don't get scared easily, and this was honestly the only time in my life I felt genuine fear. It's the only thing that's ever happened to me that I truly can't explain. I've heard wooden floors creak, even extremely old floors, and none of them have ever creaked so methodically before. I've always intended to drive up there sometime and see if the cabin still stands. If I do, maybe I'll go inside again and give that 10 minutes another chance. Who knows, maybe this time I'll last the entire 10 minutes.
Story 3.
My family has owned and operated a summer camp for young teens for over 40 years. My parents still technically own and run the camp, but because they're getting older, they aren't really hands-on anymore, and they haven't been for a few years now. I take care of most of the activities and daily operations. Our camp runs 3 separate 12-day sessions during the summer. The 12th day is on a Friday, and we get a 2-day break before the next session starts on a Monday. Well, all the other employees get a 2-day break. I stay behind and make sure the camp is ready for the next batch of kids. One summer a few years ago, we had to cancel the last session because of something that happened. It started on the last day of the second session. One of the girls came up to me after breakfast and told me that she was happy to be going home. That always made me sad to hear because it was usually an indication that they didn't enjoy their time at camp. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me that she didn't sleep well the last 2 nights, so she was happy to be going home and sleeping in her own room. I continued to ask why she didn't sleep well. She told me it was because she was being bothered by an owl man at night.
What?
I was almost at a loss for words. I didn't know how I should react to this. I couldn't tell if she was joking, dreaming, or hallucinating. She said she saw the owl man 2 nights ago. She heard a tapping sound on the window. She woke up and saw the owl man outside. He looked like he was waving at her. She convinced herself she was dreaming and tried to go back to sleep. The next night, which was her final night sleeping at camp, she woke up to the owl man tapping on the window again. That's when she told me that she knew this wasn't a dream. He was clearly there. She went over to the window, and the owl man asked if she could let him in because it was cold outside. She told him she wasn't allowed and to leave her alone. He made a sad sound and ran into the forest. While she was telling me all this, she didn't look scared or even that concerned. She just looked tired. I made sure she was okay, and she was, and then we went our separate ways. I waved it off as a vivid dream or just a crazy imagination. After all, an owl man is a ridiculous-sounding creature. All the kids left, and I started getting the camp ready for the next session that was going to start that Monday. Just little tasks to get everything in order. Throughout the rest of the afternoon and evening, I kept hearing strange noises. I ignored it for the most part because I knew I was the only person on the grounds at this time. That night, I was staying on the grounds doing some paperwork and planning some of the activities for the next session. While I was sitting at my desk, I continued to hear these noises outside. I kept looking out the windows, but I never saw anything. Our camp is secluded in the woods, so it's not impossible for there to be an animal outside lurking around. A few hours into the night, I was finally getting ready to sit down and take a load off. Just as I put my feet up, a blast of light came through the blinds from outside. It was the motion sensor floodlight on the side of the house. I got up and looked outside. Still, I didn't see anybody or any animal out there. I won't lie, that freaked me out. This wasn't a sensitive floodlight. It doesn't just turn on when a raccoon or something small comes by. Something big enough to activate the sensor had to turn it on. And that's what freaked me out. I didn't even make it back to my chair when I thought I heard a scratching sound coming from the front door. I shouted and asked if anybody was out there, and nobody responded. I just kept hearing that scratching sound. That gave me a little more reason to believe an animal was out there, but it still didn't make a lot of sense. The animals around the camp never tried to get into one of the cabins this aggressively. I stormed over to the door and smashed my fist into it to try and scare the animal away, and it worked. The scratching sound stopped. I started listening through the wooden door, trying to hear anything I could so I could determine what animal was outside. A few seconds later, I heard the undeniable sound of footsteps descending the wooden stairs that led to the front door. I was in shock and fear all at once. I finally worked up the courage a few seconds later to stand up and look out the window that's next to the front door. I expected to see a person standing in the driveway staring at me, but once again, it was just the darkness and nothing else. I flipped the light switch on that turns the outdoor light in the front of the house on. Once again, I expected to see someone lurking, but again, nothing. I turned the light off and went back to my chair. I sat in silence for a while, trying to figure out what was happening. During that time, I didn't hear or see anything that made me think twice. Even though I know I heard the sound of footsteps, I convinced myself that I had misheard whatever was out there, and it had to be an animal. It was the only logical thing that made sense. A few hours passed, and I was getting tired. I eventually fell asleep in the chair. I'm not sure how long I was asleep when I heard a loud crash come from the back of the house. I jumped out of the chair because the noise was alarming. I could see the floodlight was shining in through the windows again. Instead of scratching, I heard a light tapping sound, this time coming from the back of the house. The tapping was coming from the other side of the glass sliding door that led to the back deck. I had curtains in front of the door, so I couldn't see outside. As I got closer to the door, the tapping was getting louder. I finally reached the curtains. I pulled them back, and standing just behind the sliding door was a man wearing a bright white owl mask. He was tapping on the glass door. It almost looked like he was waving back at me the way he was tapping. I started shouting in a panic, but the man didn't react. He just kept tapping. I tried to shout at the owl man to go away, but I think just a mumbled mess slipped out of my mouth instead. After I shouted at him, he stopped tapping. We just stood there staring at each other. The owl man grabbed the sliding door and tried to open it, but thankfully I had it locked. He asked if I could please open the door so he could show me what was in his bag. I wanted to act, but I couldn't move. The sheer panic I felt in this moment was actually crippling. I finally was able to fumble around in my pocket and grab my phone. As I was dialing 911, the owl man told me that it wasn't a good idea to call the police, and that it was going to make him very angry. Obviously, that didn't stop me. While I was on the phone with the police, the owl man ran back into the forest. I tried to see exactly where he ran off to, but once he hit the darkness, he was gone. The police eventually showed up, and after a full investigation and search of the surrounding area, they never found him. They did find the owl mask deep in the woods, just hanging from a tree branch, and underneath that, a backpack with a pink t-shirt inside that had Vermont written on it with cursive handwriting. It's important to note that our camp is nowhere close to the state of Vermont. In fact, Vermont is on the other side of the country. But the worst part of all this was that wrapped inside the Vermont shirt was a knife. Not just a pocket knife or a kitchen knife, but a big butcher knife. Even with the mask and backpack, they were never able to find out who the man was, where he came from, or what he intended to do. He just showed up one day trying to get inside one of the cabins, and he didn't try very hard. When the camper told him to go away, he did. When he tried to get inside my cabin, he once again didn't try very hard. He could have easily broken a window, but instead, he just disappeared. When the police found the backpack, that was more than enough evidence to cancel the next session. We just didn't know if it was safe to have all of those children here with this owl man still on the loose. We never officially stated the reason to the public why we canceled the next session. My family was able to pull some strings and keep the real reason quiet from the public. It's why I'm writing this without giving my real name or the name of the camp, because we still run the camp to this day, and if parents knew a crazy man in a mask was wandering around in the woods, we wouldn't have a camp to run anymore. It's been a few years, and nothing like this has happened since. We even hired security guards just in case. Ever since that encounter, I've been on high alert every night, just waiting for him to come back. I hope every day of my life that this was just an isolated event, and that wherever the Owl Man is today, he stays there and never comes back to this camp.
Hey man, well, let's see. Yep, that is the end of this video. Hope y'all enjoyed it. Let me know what y'all think I should react to next. And with all that being said, I'll see y'all in the next one.